everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Today's webinar focuses on how to achieve long-term manufacturing success. I'm Ann Cosgrove, the Editorial Director of Business Facilities, and today I'll be your moderator. Today's presentation is sponsored by the Greater Richmond Partnership, and we're looking forward to an informative talk today with our panelists, as well as your questions for your panelists at the end of the conversation. Before we get started, I'd like to cover a few housekeeping items. On your dashboard, you will see a Q&A box. That is where you could submit your questions to our panelists at the end of the conversation. They'll be addressed. Also, if you have any technical difficulty or other type of question, you can send those in and someone on our team will answer those privately right away. So let's turn to the topic at hand, how to achieve long-term manufacturing success. We have a great panel today for you, and I will introduce them before we get started. Let's see, there are key ingredients that formulate success in manufacturing, such as the right strategy, the right workforce, and of course, the right location. So to delve into this topic today, I will introduce you to our panelists. First, a manufacturer who has enjoyed success in the Richmond, Virginia market for more than 100 years. Matt Reinhardt is the Vice President and General Manager of Aramids for DuPont. Matt started his career with DuPont's Tyvek after earning a degree in mechanical engineering from Clemson, and his vast and varied experience spans R&D, sales, and product management. Earlier this year, Matt returned to DuPont to lead the company's Nomex and Kevlar business. We also have Christine Chandler today. She's president of AdvantaStaff. That's a staffing firm that primarily works with manufacturers, so we're really looking forward to her insight today. Chris has been a leader in the staffing industry for more than 25 years. She works with programs from one person to more than 1,500 employees, and she's a certified staffing professional. We also have Jennifer Wakefield here today. She's the president and CEO of the Greater Richmond Partnership, the regional economic development organization for the Greater Richmond, Virginia area. Jennifer has more than 20 years of marketing experience and 17 in economic development. She served in management roles for more than 10 years and is on the board of the International Economic Development Council. So we will get started. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
So Matt, I'd like to ask you a question first, since you are the manufacturer on our panel here today. Your role at DuPont focuses on Kevlar and Nomex product lines. So can you please talk about those products and explain how they're used and produced? Give us some background.
Yeah, thanks, Ann. And luckily, I haven't been with DuPont for the entire 100 years we've been in the region, but only about 25 or so off and on through my career. But yeah, Nomex and Kevlar are two. Many people have probably heard of the Kevlar product line. It's synonymous for strength. They're both high-performance fibers. So we manufacture these fibers here in Richmond, Virginia. We have locations around the world, but our largest manufacturing site is here in Richmond. It's actually the largest manufacturing site for all of DuPont around the world. And again, Kevlar is best way to think of it is a very strong yellow string. And Nomex is a very strong and highly temperature resistant white string. They are then made into a number of different product forms that we manufacture in Richmond. It goes into a yarn. It can go into a pulp, which is kind of a ground up yarn. We make it into paper. We do fabrics as well. And then those different product forms are sold into a lot of different applications around the world. What we're best known for is our bullet resistant properties we have with Kevlar. So U.S. military around the world and law enforcement use it in vest, helmets, and vehicle armor as bullet resistance. We also go into a lot of other protective apparel, such as turnout gear for firefighters. Both Nomex and Kevlar are used in firefighter turnout gear, but also industrial workers. Our workers we have at the site in Spruance all wear Nomex garments for the majority of their days in high hazard processes. And we also sell a lot of thermal protection to the military. We also have a number of more industrial end uses, not necessarily on the protective apparel side. Nomex paper is used as electrical insulation. It goes into transformers and motors. And we're really excited right now because about 90% of all electric vehicles manufactured around the world right now are utilizing Nomex paper as their primary electrical insulation in that motor. So it's a rapidly growing market for us. And we love the fact that we're part of a sustainability trend around the world. We also go into wind turbines and solar panels as well. So we're heavily involved with green energy. Another main use for Nomex and Kevlar papers is structural. Aircraft are made with honeycomb core as one of the main structures. When you walk onto an airplane, under the floor panels will be honeycomb core. When you open the doors and luggage bins, they'll be reinforced with honeycomb core, and all of that is made with Nomex and Kevlar papers in as well. And finally, we have auto and industrial markets. So it's used, again, that high strength is used in tires reinforcement. So run flat tires have Kevlar in them, and a number of other high performance tires, brake pads, hoses and belts. And then things like fiber optic cable as well, and oil and gas umbilicals utilize the strength of Kevlar. So just a little bit of a cross section of the many different applications that we go into. So it's an exciting business to be in.
Thank you. Yes, definitely. I'm involved in a lot of different areas there. And I did want to also ask you about Tyvek, that's also produced in the Greater Richmond area by DuPont. And with a lot of those applications you just mentioned, very critical applications. I wanted to ask you about Tyvek, how during the pandemic, your facility there had a high demand for the Tyvek bodysuits, I understand, to help battle the pandemic. So can you talk about that challenge as it related to your business?
No, it's a great question. And yes, we really pride ourselves in the fact that we help protect people around the world, particularly when in very dire circumstances. So again, our ballistic protection we have in Kevlar. I mentioned firefighters utilize Nomex and Kevlar, but Tyvek is used very heavily during a number of different pandemics is one, but also even firefighters during the cleanup stages. If you watch, you'll see a lot of people wearing in Maui, for example, recently. We donated a large number of Tyvek garments to help with the cleanup there, just to protect people. But during the pandemic with COVID, we had a very major surge. We've had a surge during Ebola in the past, so this is something that's not necessarily new to our business. Obviously creates a lot of complexities within your business to try to get a lot of material out very quickly. The nice thing is our Tyvek business, this is not new to us. We have strategic stocking around the world to make sure that we have excess ability to get product, quickly get garments, and we sell the garments directly ourselves in many cases to where it's needed very quickly. And then we've also been able to very quickly ramp up and in some cases divert production from other Tyvek end uses such as house wrap. That's probably what people see the most when you drive around. You'll see Tyvek house wrap in our houses. So at times we have to divert some of our production to garments to make up for that. And we're also continuing to invest in more lines, to continually build our capability to meet the needs as they move forward. But yes, the COVID pandemic was a period of very high surge demand, and we did a great job. Again, we can produce over 200 million garments a year, and during surge times, it can ramp up to even greater than that with our assets around the world.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. So now that we've adapted or normalized, should we say, COVID, can you talk about how your product lines have adapted to the supply chain to meet demand for your innovative products? Maybe what you've brought over from the pandemic, or otherwise in terms of supply chain strategies.
Yeah, I think for all manufacturers, and quite frankly, beyond just manufacturers, retail and everything else, I think what the pandemic taught us was how interconnected the global economy truly is. I think everybody probably remembers, wasn't directly tied to the pandemic, but when that cargo ship was stuck in the canal at the Red Sea and really bogged down like 30% of global trade. And I've been involved with global trade most of my career. I never would have imagined one instance like that could have such a huge impact on supply chain reliability. And COVID was very similar. I think just supply chains just weren't there. And quite frankly, many of them are still not quite together. And I think what we've seen, aerospace is a good example where because there was such a large drop in production during COVID, some of the suppliers didn't make it back out. And so there's certain parts that are slowing down the overall build rate. And I think that's one of the key learnings I think we've taken through all this. One is to truly understand where you have vulnerability if something goes wrong. It's, when you go through something like COVID and again, this issue in the canal of the Red Sea, the things you don't plan for. So the key is learn from that and make sure you plan for them in the future. So we look to diversify our supplier base a little bit more than we have in the past. To be less dependent on one or two key suppliers, to make sure we have multiple sources from around the world. Even things like trade routes and ports and things like that, to make sure we're not completely dependent on one port. We had some issues with some of the port strikes in California a number of years ago that made it very challenging. Getting product in and out of China has been a real challenge. It's a big market for us. both in raw material supply, but also we sell a lot into China. So the key message really there has been about diversification. And the other thing is to make sure you have local production for the local market. I think we've tried to become a little bit less dependent on, kind of being able to supply everything from everywhere to make sure that we have enough capacity in region to support the needs in region. It's something I've seen from a lot of our customers as well. Again, we supply a lot of different industries and different customer bases, and you're seeing them make sure they have enough supply within the region also.
Thank you. And I'm glad you mentioned your customers, because I was going to ask you, do you think some of these from your perspective and your company's perspective, are those supply chain challenges and solutions something you think is distinct or unique to DuPont, or have you seen other manufacturers, peers, kind of dealing with the same thing? And what have you seen?
Yeah, it's not unique to us at all. I think, and again, actually during the COVID, I was actually working for another company, which was a customer of DuPont, and recently came back, and we went through a lot of the same challenges. I would say nothing from a supply chain complexity was unique to any specific industry or country. And that was one of the things I think that was very unique about COVID. Very rarely do we go through something where the entire world is starting with the same challenges at the same time. And again, that interconnectivity of every single region really caused a lot of issues. These things always create opportunities too, though. I think sometimes we always look at the negative of these, but we learned a lot. I think, again, having a more diversified supply base is going to make us stronger in the future. Doing a little bit more localization, which our customers are doing as well, I think helps in terms of efficiencies and productivity. So a lot of good has come out of some of the challenges that came through COVID for us and our customer base.
Great point. Great point. So let's shift a little bit to workforce, which is another impact that COVID has brought about, and we're still working our way through across manufacturing. So I just wanted to ask you a quick question as far as DuPont. Have you been adjusting your company to the incredible unemployment rate? It's 4%. I'm sorry, it's under 4% for the nation, under 3% for the state of Virginia, and in the Richmond area where you are located. So how have you and your region been dealing with that?
Yeah, it's a great question, and quite frankly, probably one of our biggest challenges coming out of COVID. I would say I think the supply chain issues with supply chain we've largely been able to work through and normalize. Labor has been tough, and the thing that compounds the issue we have with a low unemployment rate, obviously there's not a lot of people looking for jobs. But the other thing that I think is overlooked a little bit through COVID is how many people left their jobs for good. I think we had a lot of very experienced workers that retired on a timeline that was maybe a little bit different than they would have otherwise. I know, again, with customers and other places I've worked, we saw very similar dynamics where a lot of people have come out of the workforce. So it's kind of compounded a problem. What we've been doing to address it, and quite frankly, we're not perfect by any means. We've definitely brought a lot of new people in. For a while, I would say in the early stages of COVID, we were bringing a number of people in that had probably a lower skill set than what we would normally bring in to a high hazard process like we have at DuPont, and we did a lot to train to get them up. We are getting a little bit more, I would say, selective around the employees we bring in now. We're working with Brightpoint here in the region, a local community college, to help with training as people come in. And that's really been the focal point for us, is to make sure we have the right level of training and onboarding as people to get new folks on board and able to really contribute as quickly as possible, and to make them feel like they're part of the success of our business so that they want to stay and work longer. So retention is also another focus area. I think it's as important to focus on retaining the employees you have than the recruiting of new folks as well. So it's definitely been a challenge, but it's one that we're kind of facing head on, and we're starting to see some real improvement this year versus last year.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thanks for that overview. So I do want to turn to Christine. This is your specialty, of course. So let's hear from you as far as first, would want to give you a chance to talk about how your company's assisting manufacturing companies like DuPont and its challenge to find workers, kind of piggybacking on what Matt was talking about, from your broad perspective. What are you seeing, and how are you helping manufacturers?
So in the introduction, you mentioned that I have quite a bit of experience, which I do. My company's been in Central Virginia for 20 years. I have well over 25 years experience in this market, all within the Richmond market and within the Central Virginia market. We are locally owned and operated, so we know this area, we know the people. I think there have been COVID allowed other services to come in. You know, you could have someone in, let's say, Kalamazoo, Michigan, recruiting for the Central Virginia market, but not really understand that market. So I think that's why it's important to deal with someone that that has that experience. And we do focus on manufacturing, so we understand the pain, and, you know, we lived with our customers through COVID. What a staffing service can do is become truly a partner for your HR company and do some of that pre-screening and, you know, churn through those numbers, churn through those people, come to understand really what our customers are looking for, and supplement the work, you know, done by a customer's own HR department. So I do believe that's where we bring a lot of value. I will say in this market, what I love about Richmond is there's a strong history of manufacturing within families that are Richmond born and raised. And a lot of that does have to do with what I have always called the big three, and that's DuPont, Philip Morris or Altria, and Honeywell. So you have a lot of people who are raised with their parents working at those facilities and working in manufacturing. So there is a good history for that here. You know, through COVID, I think companies had to learn how to pivot to become more flexible, because you truly didn't know if you were going to have the materials in, as Matt mentioned. You didn't know if you were going to have the people. You didn't know if you were going to have a COVID outbreak. And so that was where we could help with that to a degree. So I think it was just, there was a lot that came out of it that companies in all aspects learn that people are starting to put in place now.
Thank you. So how do you think companies can prepare themselves now for long-term success in recruiting talent? You know, Matt had mentioned skill sets, maybe being a little bit, you know, not up to par. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but, you know, in the beginning of this kind of transition we're all going through, or manufacturers are going through, I should say. So what's something that companies can prepare themselves for now for long-term success? What are some things they can lay out?
One of the positives I think that came out of COVID was, in a lot of ways, companies were forced to upgrade their technology. And I have seen companies moving towards, with trying to recruit a workforce now, you really need to appeal to how they like to work, and how people, a younger workforce wants now is they want immediate communication, and they want technology. So, and I love working with companies that are new to the area, because they have the opportunity to set things up to really be able to work with you know, the people. So let's say with communication, people they want online training manuals. They want information in a break room, maybe where they could sit down at a workstation and access training manuals, or access shift schedules, or things along those lines. We have put in place things like geofencing for clocking in. So they have an app on their phone. If they walk past the front door of the customer, they just clock in on their phone. They don't have to worry about a paper time card, or writing something down, or going to a time clock and clocking in and out. So we've seen, we had to learn how to do those things very quickly, and we've seen our customers have to adapt. And I think a lot of that came from COVID, but it helped move a lot of people forward as well, and really learn how to attract and retain, you know, a workforce that typically, when you're coming into manufacturing, you're talking about 20-year-old, 30-year-old workforce. So that is one of the positives that's exciting, and something that has helped us.
Do you think there's a challenge that is still needing to be overcome? You mentioned some positive moves there in the industry. Do you think there's some challenges or ways you advise your clients to increase their workforce attraction?
I think, again, it's communication. I guess the younger workforce, they've been taught to challenge themselves in the educational systems, I believe. So they want to know why. Why do I have to do it this way? It's not enough to just say, this is the way it's done. And it's hard if you have processes that have been in place for years and years and years and years to do that. So that's why it's exciting if a company is looking at setting up a new operation that they have, it's a great opportunity to kind of revamp your whole recruiting, supervision, management, training, to really sit down and think about what does it take now to truly appeal to, engage, and sustain and upskill that type of workforce, a manufacturing workforce. So I think it can be flipped, and you could take that time to do those things. And that's what is appealing for setting up a new site like that.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. So Jennifer, I'd like to turn to you from the economic development standpoint, and knowing Richmond so well, I'd like to talk about manufacturers, and then some things that the area is doing to attract and retain manufacturers. So let's stick on the workforce for a minute. So how are manufacturers making location decisions when unemployment's so low everywhere? What are you seeing as far as what that decision-making journey is like?
Whether it's a manufacturer or some other business, the first thing that is top of mind is talent, and more talent. And so do we have the right kind of talent here in our market now? And will we have the right kind of talent in the future? It's important to also consider the size of the market. Richmond is a mid-sized MSA, so we've got 1.3 million people. But as Christine shared, there is a great history of manufacturing in our market. So not only do we have companies like DuPont who've been here and manufacturing for nearly 100 years, we also have newer companies like the Lego Group. Mondelez is spinning out 10,000 Oreos per minute in our market. We've got Cascades doing paper. We've got Stone Brewing making beer, and Sapporo. So what they want to see is, what is the pipeline of these specific job codes or these, SOCs? And so we've got over 33,000 people that work in manufacturing in our market of 1.3 million. Of that, what's also important to look at is, where are we based location-wise? And we are the midpoint of the East Coast, kind of equidistant between Florida and Maine. And you can reach almost half of the US population within one truck day's drive. And that's important because people want to get their goods that they're manufacturing out and about, whether it's through the airport or through the Port of Virginia. So they operate a Richmond Marine Terminal that has barge service back and forth to the Port of Virginia multiple times per week. And that is being utilized by many of the manufacturers that are in this market. So talent now and in the future. And then we've got also 1.7 million higher education students within 150 miles. So much like we're equidistant on the East Coast, we're also positioned right in between Raleigh and DC. And so we were right there at the midpoint. So with the universities, the higher education universities that are in that market, there's 1.7 million higher education students. So we can serve any company's needs now and well into the future, so long as they're looking at a good mid-sized market.
Thank you. Thank you. So you've described a lot of the features and advantages of Richmond. So I do want to turn back to Matt, whose company is operating there, obviously, for nearly 100 years, as we mentioned. So DuPont being in the Richmond region for nearly a century and continuing to invest in the production line, as you described in brief in the beginning, I'd like to ask you, circle back, what would you say has contributed to DuPont's success in Richmond all these years, and now in recent years with things changing so quickly?
Yeah, it's interesting. We have some pictures around the site that show the original construction, and we outdate Interstate 95, for example. There was no Interstate 95, so there's a picture to go straight from our site, which is right off Route 1 or Jefferson Davis Highway, We're kind of bound by Route 1 and 95, and you can see all the way to the river. There's just fields there. So it's kind of interesting how long we've been there. And I think the key to any company and business that's been able to sustain themselves for as long as we have, whether it's in a site or just the business altogether, there aren't many companies that are 100 years old in the U.S., much less individual locations that are. And we're over 200 years old, DuPont. So we're one of the oldest companies. We actually started selling gunpowder to Thomas Jefferson to go way back. But the key, I think, to longevity is reinventing yourselves in innovation, particularly for a manufacturer. And DuPont, for years, science is in our DNA. We were one of the largest companies in the world for years. We're not quite that size and scale now, but we have reinvented ourselves, and we've done that at the Richmond site as well. In order to do that, you have to have the talent. I think Jennifer and Christine both hit on this earlier. You have to have the engineers, you have to have the operators, you have to have the technicians that are able to reinvent and adapt to what is needed for the future. We recently made an investment over $200 million in our next generation of Kevlar. You kind of see behind my head here, Kevlar Exo, which again was every one of the products that we manufacture, we invent. Tyvek was invented by DuPont, Nomex was invented by DuPont, and Kevlar was invented. And it was new to the world, not just a new product for us. And again, that spirit of innovation and bringing new materials to the world has been at the heartbeat for us. And when you look at the local universities that we can tap into, I am a Clemson grad, but I must admit there's some really great schools here in Virginia. Virginia Tech, we have a number of grads there. VCU, whose engineering program is a little bit newer. I grew up in the Richmond area and remember when VCU didn't have an engineering program, and it's been great and a great addition for us bringing folks in. Virginia Union, Virginia State, in the Richmond area itself. But again, what was mentioned by Jennifer, we have NC State grads. We quite frankly recruit from throughout the country, but when you're trying to attract talent, Richmond is a fantastic place to bring people in. I remember when I first had my offer from DuPont, I have a number of different locations I can go to. And when you go into manufacturing, typically you're looking at South Texas or somewhere in Texas, and maybe Louisiana. There's not a lot of manufacturing left in urban areas, quite frankly. And Richmond's a very nice balance of having an urban infrastructure and support to do things and actually have a life outside of work, but also small enough to be intimate and be able to support, and not have huge costs of living where manufacturing, quite frankly, won't work. So it's a great cross section. I would say selfishly, I have 3 children that have gone through the public school system here. The education in the area is fantastic. If you go north or south, it tends to be more expensive to live, quite frankly. Raleigh's more expensive than Richmond. DC is a lot more expensive than Richmond. So again, that cost of living is a huge piece. All these have contributed to us being able to bring a lot of talented people in our organization and keep them in our organization, which allows us to flourish and grow. And again, continue to grow here 100 years after we first put in the bricks, and which are still there, still some of the same buildings that we installed back in the 20s.
Thank you for that. So let's turn back, and Jennifer, to get a broader lens from kind of building on what Matt just talked about with the location and kind of everything that's builds to being at a great site over many years. What are some of the site selection location trends nationally that your team is witnessing that you're internalizing here, there in Richmond?
Yeah, so I think calendar year 22 was the busiest that any economic developer in the world was. And that's because as we began to come out, like everyone hit the brakes in 2020, in the spring of 2020, and then slowly started letting off of the brakes. By 2021, I think they were flooring it. And in 2022, like my car has like a shift where you go into like, I don't know what it's called, fast mode, right? Like, or maybe it's speed mode, right? So they've been on speed mode and flooring it the entire time through 2022. And so we've seen a level of projects and the size of projects really that have been completely unprecedented in the market. What it's also done is that the pandemic has sped up these site searches. And so whereas a typical site search was taking 18 months on average prior to the pandemic, we were lucky if a project was 6 months long, in the more recent times. Some of them decisions were made within a matter of weeks. So what that means is that much more research has been done both by corporate executives as well as site location consultants who are often involved in these site searches. Much more is done online. And so what we've tried to do is make sure that we've got enough information on our website to be helpful for people as they're looking for that, but that they can also figure out, who can I reach out to ask more in-depth information and analysis, and know that an economic development organization like the Greater Richmond Partnership, or wherever you may be looking, is there really to assist you. Any company that is looking for a site search, and it is free and confidential to work on project management.
Thank you. So let's build on that for just a minute and you talked about you maybe using technology more, making that information readily available as that, initial or maybe beginning step. So once, a company does reach out, how do you all work in assisting companies in that site location decision? Where do you kind of pick that up, your organization, or, in general, economic developers, where do you see them kind of taking the ball and running to really bring it to the finish line for a company?
Yeah, and oftentimes we work with large major companies like DuPont and others, but we also worked with small and medium enterprises and people who may be doing their first expansion beyond their first location. So this may be the first secondary location, or sometimes the first location into the United States. And so really making sure that we can be a true partner in their needs and helping them identify what it is that they're really looking for in a new location, whether it's information on the workforce, providing really great project management for them in confidence, and then making sure that we can make the right connections within the market, because that's really critical, that there's a soft intro into people who are here, especially related to information about incentives that may be available to companies. We can pull and analyze all kinds of workforce data and really drill down deep, looking at things like wages, et cetera.
Thank you. So I want to invite our attendees to continue to send in questions. We will kind of keep cycling through those now that we'll kind of take some of those questions. I want to thank you all, and I'll just kind of put out these questions to each of you, and we'll just kind of have a little back and forth in the time we have left. So I did want to ask you about supply chain challenges, but specifically generally more reshoring. You had talked about companies putting the pedal to the metal. A lot of these folks are coming, back to the U.S. or, due to all the supply chain and other issues that were going on. So maybe Jennifer, I'll put this to you first, and then of course whoever wants to join in. Reshoring is coming back to the U.S. How have you seen this trend play out in Richmond or elsewhere, in your economic development experience? And what are some observations you've made about companies that have been able to really get back to the U.S. and get moving, as they'd like to?
One of the biggest examples in the last few years was the Lego Group deciding to locate their only U.S. manufacturing operation here in the Richmond market, hiring nearly 2,000 people and $1 billion in capital investment. So they were looking at reshoring their manufacturing efforts. But what we've really seen a lot of is we've got some really fantastic researchers in the life sciences industry, and a lot of growth in that other industry that is related to pharmaceutical manufacturing. And so it's all tied to the work that Matt mentioned at Virginia and Commonwealth University. And so there is a lot of work that has gone on, and several companies that have established here that made us a winner of the Economic Development Administration's Build Back Better Regional Challenge. And that is specifically to reshore pharmaceuticals for essential medicines. And so that has been a very big push in our market. And so we've seen a lot of interest from pharmaceutical manufacturers, because during the pandemic, what was realized was that a lot of our essential medicines that we take every day are not actually made here. And when you have barges that get stuck in canals or elsewhere, it becomes a problem, right? And so it is also a national security risk. And so pharmaceutical manufacturing is a big effort, especially in our market right now.
Thank you.
And maybe to build, I'm sorry, maybe to build on that a little bit. I think what you find around the country, and really truly around the world too, is urban centers tend to have industries that they're very focused on, and they kind of build on top of themselves. high performance fibers is a good example. You know, we started it with rayon years ago, and other nylon and things like that, that we've eventually evolved out of. But Honeywell is another example that was brought up earlier. You know, they have a competitor product to ours, Spectra, which is made right down the road from us, and there's a lot of fiber processors in the area. And I think Jennifer's comment around pharmaceuticals, I think it is important. You tend to have those core industries often by one large, you know, like a DuPont kind of brings it in and brings that capability in, and knowledge and skill base, and you have that those people know how to do it, and then other folks will kind of join in. And I think the education, you know, particularly at the university level, becomes really important in that area if you can build that skill set. Because you look at Raleigh is a great example with, you know, information technologies and things like that, and just how it has really ballooned out from, you know, the big three with NC State, Duke, and North Carolina Chapel Hill, and how that's become just a huge industry and driver for the area. So, you know, I think we're very proud that we've been a contributor to that and helped really kind of blossom, you know, manufacturing high performance fibers for years now. And it's exciting to hear things like pharmaceuticals coming into the area as well, and for VCU to be a part of that.
Thank you. So let's talk a little bit about site availability. I kind of staying on that speed of project, you know, site selection theme there, because a lot of things we see, you know, through our readers, just mirroring what you're all talking about here too. And I'm sure that a lot of the people in the audience is, you know, we want to get that project going, mega projects per se, but also those smaller and medium-sized projects really want to get to market and be able to build to scale maybe, or expand to scale on that site that they do choose. So I wanted to ask you, what is the landscape of site availability for businesses in Richmond specifically, but also maybe even Jennifer, or, you know, obviously, you know, Christine or Matt, what kind of advantages are you seeing that locations can offer for site availability that are really, you know, would really maybe help seal the deal for companies?
Sure. I would share that Virginia and Greater Richmond have really been focusing on making sure that we have sites ready and available by our work with the Virginia Economic Development Partnership and tiering of sites so that they are ready to go. That we have available greenfield properties as well as buildings throughout the market that we represent, which is the city of Richmond and then the counties of Chesterfield, Hanover, and Henrico that surround the city. In our market. So we absolutely have sites of varying sizes, from, you know, very small urban downtown cores to very large tracts that you could put a very major semiconductor or EV battery manufacturer or data center there.
Okay. So as far as DuPont, just to bring it back for a minute to you, Matt, with the long history and success there in the Richmond region, what would you say are, for manufacturers, some advantageous benefits that you see for the Richmond region for manufacturers like DuPont, or, you know, obviously of all different sizes? You did mention workforce and education, which I know is, you know, Virginia is pretty well known for in the Richmond region, but what are some other things that have really helped support your company?
Yeah, I think infrastructure is another important part. You know, we talked earlier around the Port of Richmond, which we do use the Port of Richmond, and, you know, which is connected to the Port of Virginia down in Norfolk, which is a major port that we utilize for getting materials in and out. So to be able to have that locally is fantastic. But it's beyond that too, just from a trucking perspective. I mean, you know, being right off of 95 and 64, it's actually a very easy place in and out. Again, you have the scale, and when you look at kind of how the city, as you get out in the counties, has kind of grown. The infrastructure is kept up by and large with the growth of the city. And as you travel around the country and certainly around the world, that is not always the case at all. And I think it's something that the city's done a nice job of growing at the right level and pace, and even getting down to the school systems and things like that. You don't hear about these crazy overcrowding. And so that's there. The other thing I would say, again, having grown up in the city, because I grew up here in Richmond myself, the city itself has become a much more attractive place to live, to visit, and to raise a family or just enjoy yourself. So I think attracting people to the region is as easy as it's ever been. You look at, you know, the Riverwalk area and you know, all the lofts that, you know, again, I remember when those were abandoned warehouses by and large, and it's just a very attractive place to bring people in. I think we have one of the highest percentages of, you know, 20 somethings in the population of Richmond around the country, and there's a lot to do. Again, a lot of places to go, and we're close to a lot of places. 2 hours from the beach, 2 hours from the mountains, 2 hours from Washington, D.C. And these things are all important, again, when you're bringing people in and attracting them to work here. So it really is a great place. For me, it's been a great place to live, but it's also a great place to attract workers. And we have a hard time transferring people out in a lot of cases. So, we are a global company. We have locations all over the place in the U.S. and around the world. And a lot of people don't want to leave once they get here. Sometimes it's hard to bring them in, but once they're in, they don't want to go.
All right, thank you. Okay, I think that's all the questions that we have coming in. If I'd like to thank you for your time, certainly, for this panel and for your different perspectives, sharing that with our audience today. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
And also thanks to the Greater Richmond Partnership for sponsoring this event, and to our audience for participating with your attendance. A recording of today's session will be available on businessfacilities.com. And also to learn more about Greater Richmond, you can visit their website at grpva.com. And Jennifer and her great staff there would be happy to help, I'm sure. So thanks, everyone. Thank you again, and have a great afternoon. Take care.